Very good. And what about the Star of Canada? This is the boat you have there, the ship that was wrecked on rocks on the Gisborne coast, 1912. What of that?
Well, the Star of Canada, if you look at our photos online, there was a lot of water down the river and under the Star, and quite a lot of water kind of blew into the structure itself, but we had a structural engineer pop around today and he's given us the all clear to open again, and we're just really glad that the river we stand on is not a slash. We don't get a lot of slash down the Taruhiru, otherwise it could have been a really different story with that, collecting up under the piles that are holding the ship in place, so that's one relief.
Well, that's been a bit of an issue across, as you might know, RNZ, and Sally Wenley here, that was who I've been thinking, slash no doubt is one of the top issues in Gisborne.
It is. Look, I think slash is a curse word here inside Awhiti, so ask any Gisborne person and you won't be able to stop us talking about it. So it's made a terrible situation worse. I'm no expert, but I've seen it in the rivers and seen it on the properties and seen the damage it's done here.
Well, I've been to Te Rāwhiti Museum. I'd love to go again. It's a fantastic museum. Keep up the great work, Eloise, and thanks for being with us.
Thanks for the time to chat, and best wishes to everyone out there across Te Rāwhiti and along the East Cape.
Really cool. Eloise Wallace there, Director Kai Whakahaere at Te Rāwhiti Museum. Yes, back to really the start of the show. Something has got to happen.
Yes,
once and for all, doesn't it? Yeah. We had quite a bit of response regarding slash. The bottom 1/3 of the hill doesn't get harvested, only harvest the top thirds, the top 2/3. This leaves the bottom third to stop any slash getting to the waterways, and also native forest would grow and eventually cover the bottom third. I imagine that I think that's what Gary Taylor from the Environmental Defence Society has said, that practices used overseas would have to be looked at here.
Yes, and why not plant native trees around that bottom part instead of pines, because they're all been blown over anyway in the cyclone.
Good on you. All right, Sally Wenley, Wade Jackson, today, thank you both. Been fantastic. I'm Wallace Chapman. I will see you tomorrow, 3:45. Stay tuned to RNZ Checkpoint with Lisa Owen next.
Kei te whakarongo mai koe ki te reo irirangi o Aotearoa. This is Checkpoint on RNZ National. I'm Lisa Owen. Ea haere ake nei, Aotearoa's roading jigsaw puzzle. It is a labyrinth of back highways and detours for freight companies with about 400 kilometres of cyclone-knackered roads. We talk to people delivering pretty much everything you rely on. So what does it mean in terms of time and money, and what should be patched up first? Police are still tracking down hundreds of people listed as uncontactable. The district commander is live with an update. Towns that were swamped in mud are now caked in mud. We're on the ground as remarkable stories of survival surface. And in Napier, contaminated silt forces evacuations. The health authorities join us live too. You can watch us on RNZ's website. RNZ News at 5 o'clock. Good afternoon. Ahi Marie ko Evie Ashton temnei. The Prime Minister says more of the government's plans will have to be scrapped or delayed in order to focus on the cyclone response. In a speech to Parliament this afternoon, Chris Hipkins laid out his agenda for the year, having earlier promised a full policy reset. Mr Hipkins told MPs that the reset has already begun, but more reprioritisation will be required.
The scale of the task ahead of us is significant. The worthy will sometimes have to make way for the urgent. We have done that before as a country. We saw governments reprioritise after earthquakes in Christchurch and Kaikoura, and we did that when we responded to the global pandemic. We will do that again.
However, Nationals leader Christopher Luxon told Parliament he's sceptical about the government's ability to rebuild from Cyclone Gabrielle. He criticised Labour's record, accusing it of failing to deliver, wasting money and forgetting the front line.
We will be supportive and constructive. We will hold the government to account. We are deeply sceptical of this government's ability to deliver and get things done.
Christopher Luxon's comments are his strongest criticism yet of the government's cyclone response. And ministers will receive advice this evening on how a multi-million-dollar support package should be divvied up across the primary sector. The government has come up with an initial $50 million to support businesses, including the horticulture and viticulture industries affected by Cyclone Gabrielle. The government expects to provide more details once ministers have agreed how the funds will be allocated. A rotation of helicopters has been flying in and out of the Tomoana showgrounds in Hawke's Bay as volunteers and authorities scramble to get emergency supplies out to cyclone-hit communities. The hub's manager, Kirsty Maynell, says it's been inundated with donations from around the country and they're now sorted for bedding and clothing. She says it's helpful for donors to check what's needed before donating.
People have a great intent of what, they've got, I need to give them this, but we do ask that it's clothing that is generic. We don't need nightclub gear. And just we do ask that whatever's donated is serviceable. The last thing that people on the ground need when we're giving them a box and they think they can use it and then they find it's broken.
Kirsty Maynell says the scale of destruction in Hawke's Bay is unlike anything she's ever experienced. About 1,700 people in Hawke's Bay and Tairāwhiti are still listed as missing after Cyclone Gabrielle. The Police Commissioner, Andrew Costa, says about 100 police staff are working on reconnecting people and trying to get that list down to people who are actually missing. People can register on the police website if they or a person they were concerned for is now safe. Rescue teams in southern Turkey are again searching rubble for people after new strong aftershocks near the border with Syria. They come 2 weeks after massive earthquakes killed tens of thousands in both countries. At least 3 people have died in the latest quakes and hundreds more are hurt. School principals are welcoming a $74 million initiative to tackle rising truancy. Terms 2 and 3 last year had some of the worst attendance records ever. Our education correspondent, John Gerritsen, reports.
About half of the new money will pay for 82 attendance officers to target children who are moderately absent. Principals say that's a growing problem, with many parents more relaxed about letting children miss class. There's also funding to help the attendance service work with 3,000 more of the most serious truants and to improve schools' data about attendance. Latest figures show 46% of children attended regularly in the third term of 2022, 13% were moderately absent and 13% were chronically absent. The figures are marginally better than term 2 last year, but still among the worst on record.
To sport now, and signing with the Saudi-backed Live Golf League could affect New Zealander Danny Lee's selection chances for future Olympic Games. The US-based professional has joined the breakaway tour for its new season, starting in Mexico next week. Lee now faces being banned from the PGA and European tours, while Live events don't currently count towards world ranking points. Golf New Zealand says Danny Lee joining Live Golf doesn't impact his eligibility for the 2024 Paris Olympics, but the potential impact on his world ranking could affect his chances of selection. 4th Division New Zealand boxing champion Mea Motu will challenge for her first world title in April. The 33-year-old has locked in a fight for the IBO Super Bantamweight belt with her international opponent to be confirmed in the coming days. Motu has rattled off 15 wins, including 6 knockouts since turning professional in 2020. New Zealand Paralympian Cameron Leslie has been nominated for the Laureus World Sports Awards. The 33-year-old is a nominee for World Sportsperson with a Disability. A dual Paralympian, Leslie competes in both wheelchair rugby for the Wheel Blacks and paraswimming. That's the news.
A call for help.
Our community is suffering. We need everybody's support. We are struggling. We are going to be in trouble for a long time.
Government support is on the way.
Businesses support packages. There are likely to be multiple of those across different areas, responding to the different needs in the different community.
Amid desperate community need.
That needs to be the number one priority, ensuring that people throughout all of our communities have the ability to obviously buy the food and the fuel and the things that they desperately need.
The full picture, Morning Report, weekdays from 6 on RNZ National. And we're funded through New Zealand On Air. You're with Lisa Owen next on Checkpoint. Right now, the short forecast from Met Service to midnight Wednesday. From Northland to Taranaki, including Bay of Plenty and the Central High Country, mainly fine, isolated showers. From Gisborne to Wairoa, fine today. A few showers from tomorrow afternoon, some possibly heavy, then turning to rain in Wairoa tomorrow evening. Whanganui to Wellington, cloudy, isolated showers increasing tomorrow afternoon. Then in Wellington and Kapiti, turning to rain tomorrow evening. Nelson and Marlborough, mainly fine. A few showers developing tomorrow morning, turning to rain tomorrow afternoon. Canterbury, Otago and Southland, rain spreading north later today and tomorrow morning with heavy falls possible. Turning to showers tomorrow morning in Southland and Otago. For Buller and Westland, a few showers. Turning to rain in Westland this evening and in Buller tomorrow morning, then clearing to fine tomorrow evening. Fiordland, periods of rain with heavy falls, becoming fine tomorrow morning. And for Kohu, Chatham Islands, fine today, showers tomorrow. The time is 7 minutes past 5. I'll have news headlines and any traffic news for you at 20 past 5.
Nā mihi iwi, tēnā koutou katoa, no mai haere mai ki Checkpoint i tēnei rā, ko Lisa Owen tēnei. It's going to be months and months of taking the long way around for freight companies faced with 400 kilometres of damaged roads, with some communities still only reachable by air or sea. The government's announced $250 million of extra funding for Waka Kotahi for emergency roadworks. The focus is on getting lifeline routes open and reconnecting isolated communities. Right now, some Tairawhiti and Hawke's Bay communities are effectively islands with little or no road access or detours that add hours onto trips. Now, here's a bit of a taster. State Highway 35 between Tupuia Springs and Tolaga Bay remains closed. State Highway 2 from Gisborne through to Aotearoa is only open 7am till 7pm. And there's no direct route Gisborne to Napier, with State Highway 2 south of Wairoa out of action, adding hours to any round trip. Gisborne-based freighters East Light Carriers manager Tamara says it's a daily roading jigsaw, and that's likely to last for months.
Well, there's a bridge gone before Tokomaru Bay, so at the moment we can only go as far as Tolaga Bay. So we can't service Tokomaru Bay Foursquare from this end nor through the north end because the road's been washed away on that side as well.
What's the workaround for you? What do you have to do to get as close as you can?
Well, at this stage, I'm not actually quite sure what's happening with Tokomaru Bay, and I'm assuming maybe the Army and Civil Defence have sorted something to get food and supplies into them. At this stage, for us to service Ruatoria and Eastern Foursquare, which is in Aotearoa, we would have to go from Gisborne to Aotearoa that way, State Highway 35.
And what does that mean for you in terms of time for drivers and things like costs, like petrol and the kind of time it takes to make that trip in that direction?
It's a long time, so my drivers wouldn't have enough time in a day to leave Gisborne, go to Ruatoria Foursquare and come back. They'd have to be based in Aotearoa to cater to those two Foursquares, and cost-wise, I've got to get accommodation over there and wages, fuel, road users, all of that adds up at the end of the day.
What about going south from Gisborne?
South from Gisborne, we can only make it as far as Wairoa at this stage. So we can help get supplies and freight into them. For all our other products like Sirenko Foods, their frozen product that we cut for them and other freight, we're looking at going through the Waireka Gorge to Rotorua, down to Palmerston North and back up to Hastings. The cost for that is extremely high, and no one really wants to pay the extra cost.
Yeah, I suppose it's got to be passed on to people, yeah?
Yeah, it would have to be, and that's the hard thing. I mean, for us to move someone's product, we've got to charge them extra, but of course they don't want to have to pay extra either because they're kind of losing out as well. So it's the chain reaction.
That trip that you have just described seems pretty epic. Do you know how many more hours that takes?
That would pretty much be a full day's worth of driving. So the legal required limit for our truck drivers is 13 hours. And that will take them at least 13 hours to get there. So their day would pretty much be full of driving from Gisborne to Hawke's Bay, and that's not getting them unloaded or reloaded for the next day, or that would all have to happen the following day. So you're looking at a 3-day turnaround before they're back in Gisborne again.
And normally, what would you do? Down and back in a day?
Down and back in a day. You can definitely do down and back in a day if State Highway 2 South was open.
So, Tamara, what does that mean in terms of drivers? Because you've got drivers on the road for longer periods of time and potentially away, and then you've got other jobs that need doing. So does that mean you need more drivers with the roads out?
I think everyone's facing that. We need more drivers and we probably need more trucks as well. You know, we're not just the only ones in Gisborne that do cut food product or essential supplies. So we're probably all facing this whole big change because we don't have a time frame as to when they can open the road from Wairoa to Napier yet. And that's a hard thing. We're trying to have to find our new normality to how things are going to work.
Sounds like every day's a bit of a jigsaw puzzle for you.
Every day's a jigsaw puzzle at the moment, but once I guess once we get through this week, we can start trying to keep moving forward and just keep planning as to how the next maybe 6 months is going to go or even longer.
So for you, Tamara, are you thinking realistically this is months and months before you're able to make an easy truck trip up the coast or down to Hawke's Bay?
Yeah, it's probably going to take that long. I'm hoping not. Like, I feel for all the families that are cut off both ways, and I really hope something gets done because something needs to be done about these roads now, especially State Highway 35. They need a proper road to start so they can start being themselves again, travelling and seeing their family and not being stuck up there.
And that was the Gisborne Freight Company, Eastlight Carriers. I was talking to the manager there, Tamara. It is 13 minutes after 5. Kia amo tonu mai. Stay with us. You're listening to Checkpoint on RNZ National. Cyclone Gabrielle's fury forced a family to break through their ceiling and onto their roof as they waited for rescue. They were lifted to safety and a week later are back at their Hawke's Bay home, sifting through the silt to save precious mementos. Our reporter Jimmy Ellingham and cameraman Nick Monroe have their tale of survival.
Emma Tuck, her partner, auntie and 4 children clung on for their lives.
It's nuts. It's hard to think that a week ago we were sitting on a roof praying for our life. Because I believe on that day we had a guardian angel looking over us. And I know who that is, so.
Who is it?
It's my daughter.
Daughter Bailey died as a baby 12 years ago.
When we were getting near the end, we were thinking, this is it, the whole house was shaking. We all just started singing You Are My Sunshine, which is her song. And we watched the water just go down and we were like, here we go.
Here is the family home on Dartmoor Road, Pukitapu, west of Napier. The valley was inundated by fast rising floodwater last Tuesday morning. On their roof, Miss Tuck and her family watched as a garage and a flat next to them, where her mother Kerry Hamlin lived, was swept away. Ms Hamlin was staying in Hastings for the night and last Tuesday tried to direct rescuers to Ms Tuck as the water rose.
How high did the water go?
Yeah, over the guttering and up on the roof, maybe about 30 centimetres upwards.
So you were on the roof of the water?
Yeah, rising and the house shaking. Thinking we are about to go now. We're about to go. It's just the lone gum tree that really saved us because it was catching all the logs that were coming. And talking to our neighbour across the road, she was watching and she said, I thought you guys were gone. Your whole house was shaking and literally that one gum tree stopped our house from buckling and us floating away.
After 5 hours, a helicopter arrived to lift the family to safety. It also took 2 family dogs from the roof, although Ms Hamlin says a dog and a cat were left behind in the house's ceiling.
Emma's partner, Aotearoa, he walked back the day after the flooding to see if he could retrieve what he thought would be dog bodies and could see paw prints in the silt. And then there was a sign written in the silt, Zara has your dogs.
Sarah is a friend of Miss Tuck who is unsure if she'll be able to return to Pukitapu. Through the community, she's found a house to rent, sourced furniture and had food delivered by neighbours as the clean-up continues. Plenty of silt's been dug from inside, and what was the front lawn is strewn with toys, clothes and other household items, including a special one in need of a wash.
I found my partner's Warriors jersey, which was given to him on our daughter's first birthday. Our daughter actually passed away, so it meant a lot to us to have that back. And
your son's here?
Yeah, my son. So my son had a hair cutting, his first hair cutting when he was 7, back in October. So his hair was a big part of, for me to keep. So I've managed to find one of them.
Ms Hamlin is now contemplating her future too and trying to stay positive.
There's definitely a lot of humour. You know, we were saying we needed to declutter. Well, we've certainly done that, Certainly done that, but, people have commented on my housekeeping skills before and it's, they said, come on, you've got to do better now.
For now, she's helping with the search for family mementos from the mud and dirt, hoping to find Bailey's memory box.
We might have lost a box of memories, but we found her little bear, her little Bailey bear, which was, what the kids carried around, and she always featured in their photos. So we've got something of her, but as I said, she wasn't in that box anymore. She was on their shoulder looking after them.
Looking after them as they pull themselves through this desperately tough time.
What a remarkable story of survival from Jimmy Ellingham and cameraman Nick Monroe, and the video version of that will be on our webpage. A dedicated team of police have been tracking down hundreds of people registered as uncontactable since Cyclone Gabrielle. Eastern District Commander Superintendent Jeanette Park joins us now. For a start, I understand, Superintendent, you've been out visiting communities. I know locals have been worried about looting. What are they saying to you about whether they feel safe or not?
Oh, sure. Yesterday I've been out with several of our communities, and I've been out with my staff every day. I've been in Gisborne, Wairoa, right across my district, and I know my district well. I've been policing here for some time, and having been actually policed for 33 years, the first question I always ask people, and I've done that today, is how can I help, and what do you need, and what concerns have you got? It was fantastic to see the support that's being provided, the volunteers. The people were incredibly upbeat, considering the tragic circumstances they're facing, but they were absolutely upbeat. They were really appreciative of, the visibility of police, the police in our community stopping and doing exactly what I was doing today. And so they didn't have, certainly did not have, when I spoke to them, any immediate concerns. But, we talked about if you have got concerns to contact, if it's an emergency, contact 111. Otherwise we have systems in place where they can take a photo of any concerning behaviour or suspicious behaviour and forward it through to our team. So they were feeling really comfortable, really well supported, and the effort that is going in from my people is incredible. They really worry about our communities, and so they're out and about and they're doing an outstanding job.
Tell us a bit more about the list of uncontactable people. What is the latest, please, in terms of numbers and people you've managed to track down and confirm that they're okay?
So the number that we've come down to around the non-contactable people is 1,100, which has been a significant reduction. So that's 1,100 reports. So we're working through that daily, and as has been said previously, there's over 100 staff working on this. It's a massive effort to make sure, just checking on, because well-being and I've said this previously, the well-being of people looking for their loved ones is crucial. So the sooner we can locate everybody, the better. And, you have my absolute reassurance that we will not stop. We will never stop. We want to locate everybody where these reports have been put through.
We're more than a week on from the floods, right? And communication is largely back up. What is slowing things down in terms of reaching these people and confirming that they're alive and okay?
So what we're doing is clearing areas, and I've mentioned this before, and getting into remote locations. So today we have police staff going in with our Air Force friends, going into remote locations. And, when you start going up the East Coast, into Aotearoa, all sorts of locations around Hawke's Bay, and they've gone and they're setting up bases for people around, support, and making sure people can connect up. But the staff that had went with the Air Force teams were actually, they said people were so thrilled to see them, of course. There was tears and there was, just heartfelt thanks. But they were also, they were doing okay, and so they sat down again. Come back to those those questions around how can we help, what can we do, and they sat down and talked about, actually what can they do, what do they need, and they were just feeling very reassured, which was fantastic.
Yeah.
So out of that,
Superintendent, I'm sorry to interrupt. I know this is an incredibly delicate situation. I know it's incredibly delicate, and there are relatives who are looking for their loved ones and are yet to have made contact. So at last report, the official death toll was 11. Has that changed at all?
No.
Okay.
So for Eastern District, it's the same for us, which is 9, and there was the 2 tragic loss of the volunteers.
So my next question is, and I would really appreciate it if you could be as direct as possible in your answer, are there other deceased people that have been found that you are still yet to identify?
So as I've said, we this is we have the 9 here in Hawke's Bay that we have confirmed as deceased, and it's really important here that there is a process to follow in relation to when we locate somebody that we need to make sure we notify next of kin and follow that process, which is really, really important. So at this stage, I can absolutely confirm we have 9 people that have been confirmed.
So when you're talking about process, please, and I just want you to be as clear as you can. So you have set up, or facilities have been set up, a temporary morgue in your district. So as part of the process that you take deceased people there, and you do not speak about that until you have confirmed their identities.
Yes, that's correct. So we that's out of respect for all parties concerned. But what I can say is that we are still sitting at 9 people that have passed away tragically.
Thank you very much for your time, Superintendent. That's Superintendent Jeanette Park, who's the Eastern District Commander there. And it is 23 minutes after 5. You're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. Homai o whakaaro, we would love your feedback. You can text us on 2101. You can tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ, and the email is checkpoint@rnz.co.nz. It's time for us to go to the headlines. Evie is standing by. Anaya Evie, mina pita pita kōrero.
The Prime Minister says more of the government's plans will have to be scrapped or delayed in order to focus on the response to Cyclone Gabrielle. Chris Hipkins told MPs this afternoon that priorities would need to be reconsidered. The first casualty is the review of the Three Waters programme, which is being delayed. In response, Nationals leader Christopher Luxon told Parliament he's sceptical about the government's ability to rebuild, accusing it of failing to deliver, wasting money and forgetting the front line. It's his strongest criticism yet of the government's cyclone response. The number of people listed as still missing in Hawke's Bay and Tairāwhiti since Cyclone Gabrielle is now down to just over 1,100. Police are asking people to update their details on their national website if they or a person they were concerned for is now safe. Magnitude 6.4 and 5.8 aftershocks have struck southern Turkey, killing at least 3 people and injuring hundreds more. They came 2 weeks after earthquakes killed 44,000 people in the country and in neighbouring Syria. And President Vladimir Putin is due to update Russia's political and military elite on the state of what he calls his special military operation in Ukraine. Russian forces control around 1/5 of Ukraine but have suffered heavy losses in the year since the invasion. Earlier today, US President Joe Biden made a short surprise visit to Kyiv and said the US will back Ukraine for as long as it takes. Those are the headlines. Looking at traffic now. In the Taupo district, there are reports of a crash on State Highway 32 near Karangahape Road, south of Waihaha. Take care there. There'll probably be delays and diversions. Further down the country, in the central North Island, the closure of State Highway 51 has been extended, and that highway is now closed between Farndon Road and Aotearoa Road because of a sewage spill. That's traffic. I will have the latest news headlines and any other traffic news for you at 5:40.
Thanks, Evie. The controversial Live Golf League has signed its first New Zealand player. US-based professional Danny Lee has been confirmed for the second season of the league, which has come under heavy criticism for its backing by Saudi Arabia. Here with more is sports reporter Clay Wilson. OK, we've seen more and more players going across to the breakaway league, and now we've got a New Zealander involved. It usually involves big money too, doesn't it, Clay?
It certainly does. And by way of background, for those that aren't familiar, this was the big story, not just in golf but in sport last year, because it wasn't only because it was a breakaway tour. Players were being offered huge sums of money. They were being banned from playing on their own tours, the European Tour, the PGA Tour. But because this league is fully funded by the Saudi Investment Fund, and the concerns around Saudi Arabia, the human rights issues there, haven't just been appeared here in golf. We've seen them. We talked about football a few weeks ago, and other sports involving sports washing, basically trying to cover up these human rights issues. And the players have been taking these huge sums of money, but facing very hard questions about the ethical and moral obligations and the decisions they're making around taking this money from Saudi Arabia. So until now, we haven't had any New Zealanders, but Danny Lee has joined now. Danny Lee's 32 years old. He's been on the tour and in the US since about 2012, so more than a decade now. He's had one win, which was back in 2015, but he did get as high as 34th in the world, so he was a pretty prominent player at one point. He's dropped away since then. But for us here in New Zealand, we've sort of been observing this from afar. It brings it a bit closer to home to have someone like this. Our top player, Ryan Fox, has been offered money by Liv to go and join, and has turned that down, so he's not going. But now we have Danny Lee, and I did get a statement from New Zealand Golf this afternoon about any potential impacts on us back here and them as a national body. They say no real impacts for them outside of perhaps for Danny Lee Olympic selection, because his ranking is going to take a hit probably as a result of this, and that could impact his future chances of going to any Olympic Games that are coming up in the next few years.
And no talk about how much money he was offered?
Not yet. They're not disclosing these sums, but they are big. It's a lot of money, it's fair to say.
Yeah. And a big honour for one of our top para-athletes.
So this is Cameron Leslie, who a lot of people will be familiar with. He's a dual Paralympian. He's a swimmer and he plays for the Wheelbacks rugby team, so a man of many talents. And he's been nominated for the prestigious Laureus World Sports Awards, which are the big World Sports Awards, glitzy, glamorous affair that's held every year. And he's been nominated for the World Sportsperson with a Disability Award, and he's one of 6 nominees for that award. And last year he won gold and 3 silvers at the World Swimming Champs, and then he also captained the Wheelblacks at the World Wheelchair Rugby Champs. So, as I say, a man of many talents, and a deserved award a deserved nomination, you would have to say. One of the talking points about this, the Black Ferns haven't picked up a nomination for Team of the Year after their World Cup feats last year. The All Blacks, when they won in 2015, they won the Team of the Year the following year for the World Sports Awards. So interesting to see the comparison here. Some people not that happy about that, but at least we have one. Cameron Leslie's there, and well-deserved nomination.
Thank you, Clay. That is sports reporter Clay Wilson. People are being evacuated from Napier Street where there's raw sewage. Fire and Emergency says members of the public need to stay away from the Aotearoa public golf course on Aotearoa Road. And anyone who may have been exposed is urged to seek medical treatment immediately. It's another health issue for people living in the areas hard hit by the storm, where there's contaminated silt covering streets. Well, joining us now is Medical Officer of Health, Bridget Wilson. Hi, Bridget. What is the particular issue with contamination here? I mean, what problems they're telling people to seek medical assistance immediately if they've been exposed?
Kia ora. Good evening. Look, it is an unfolding situation. We've got health protection officers on the ground supporting fire and emergency and the council to understand just what's going on. But I think in general, giving some general advice, contact with sewage is always an issue from the perspective of obviously infection. People who get in contact with raw sewage are at risk of really, the main risk is around gastroenteritis, so tummy bugs, vomiting, diarrhoea, but also can lead to skin infections if you've got open wounds that have been in contact. But certainly, when we have more information about the situation, if there's any sort of wider public health risk or public health advice, we'll be certainly notifying the public swiftly. So keep an eye out on our Facebook page for any updates or health advice.
I understand there are tests being done in the area. I mean, what are you testing for? And are there other areas around town where you're doing the same?
Oh, look, as it's an unfolding situation, I can't sort of give specifics around the testing that's going on, but I think the important message for people out there doing cleanup at the moment, because there's a lot of that going around, is that we have to assume that actually a lot of the silt that is built up, that has been carried into areas by floodwaters, is likely to have been contaminated by sewage. So actually it's really important that when people are undertaking cleanup, that they take some really practical steps to reduce their risk of becoming unwell.
So what are you talking, masks and gloves here, or?
Yeah, absolutely. So mask, gloves, if possible an N95 mask, especially as silt starts to dry and we see dust in the air. But other really practical things, thick-soled boots, because we're starting to see people coming in with foot injuries, having stood on things in silt, nails, etc. So some thick-soled shoes, long-sleeved, trousers and tops where possible, gloves, duty shoes, and a mask.
In terms of exposure to gastro, right, so is it through ingestion, like, for example, people not wearing gloves, touching contaminated material and then sticking them around their face and mouths, or could it just be breathing in stuff as well?
Absolutely. So it's mainly spread when, the gastro bugs get into people's mouths. And so really important to obviously wash your hands, wear gloves when you're cleaning up, but after you finish cleaning up, really important to wash your hands and shower off if you can. Obviously it can also be just spread person to person when you might be looking after someone who's unwell. So again, if you've got someone unwell at home, really, really important to wash your hands really thoroughly and often, and actually ventilate your house. If someone's vomiting in the house, open up the windows and things. Just get a bit of airflow moving and reduce the risk of spreading it amongst the household.
How many gastro cases have you got in the area at the moment?
So look, the good news is we haven't yet seen an increase in hospitalisation for gastroenteritis. Gastro is one of those things that actually most of the time people can actually manage at home by themselves. So we we don't have a firm number of gastro cases in the area because obviously, most people are able to manage at home, but we are starting to hear from general practices that they are starting to see gastro cases come through. Good news is we haven't seen an increase in hospitalisations.
Can you tell us anything about COVID cases at the moment? Because I imagine people are in close quarters, they're cleaning up, in evacuation centres clustered together. What is going on with COVID there?
Absolutely. So look, our formal data on COVID hasn't shown an increase in COVID in the area, but that data obviously relies on people taking a RAT test and then uploading their RAT test via either My COVID Record or the Ministry of Health 0800 number. And so we suspect probably what's happening is that actually people haven't been either testing or registering their results because, as you say, people have been in close quarters, and so we would expect an increase in the region. So what we would really encourage is if you have any cold or flu-like symptoms, really important to take a RAT test and then register your result either through My COVID Record or through 0800 222 478. And that helps us in terms of planning our health system response to know how much illness around COVID is out there.
Thank you so much for that. That is the Medical Officer of Health, Dr. Bridget Wilson there in Hawke's Bay. Obviously, some areas are out of bounds. They're asking people to evacuate. That is around the Aotearoa Road area. Stay away because they think there is, human waste on the golf course there. It is 25 minutes to 6. Kia mau tonu mai. Do stay with us. You're listening to Checkpoint on RNZ National. And it is time for the business news. Ko taku hoa e nai ko Nona Peltier. Nona joins me live in the studio. Okay, a head of steam building up against the takeover for mobile donations company PushPay. This is the one that has the electronic devices for church donations and what have you. So what's happening?
Yeah, well, there is a takeover offer. It's through a scheme of arrangement, so it requires shareholder approval, but not just any kind of shareholder. It has to be one that does not have an interest. For example, say if you owned a big stake in the company, you might not be able to necessarily vote in that. However, two big institutional shareholders, that's Nico Asset Management and the Accident Compensation Corporation, otherwise known as ACC, together own 7.6% in that firm. And both of those organizations have said they are going to vote against the offer, which has been talked up by the board. And the board is saying shareholders should approve it. But these guys have said no. And they're suggesting that investors should speak to their own financial advisors to get a sense of whether it's a fair offer or not. It's the offer values the company at $1.5 billion. The share price on offer is $1.34. But that's at the low end of a valuation report, an independent valuation report, which says that the company's worth between $1.33 and $1.53. But these institutional investors say that range does not really take into account the future and potential earnings of this particular company. So they're thinking, no, they're going to vote against it. The market didn't really like that. So, of course, the offer, the news about it, saw the share price drop 0.8% today.
PGG writes in, cautious about the outlook for the rural sector after reporting a drop in the first half-year profit. That'll be before they even get to cyclone damage.
Well, and we haven't talked about surveys for a while, have we? But turns out that just before Cyclone Gabrielle, there were a couple of negative surveys of confidence in the agricultural sector. So that already pointed to a downturn. There's concern about rising interest rates, increased input costs, supply chain disruptions. And, of course, this confidence is something that PGG Wrightson is concerned about because, of course, they supply to that rural sector. So they're suggesting that they're taking a conservative approach to the second half. They're not very confident about how that's shaking out, especially now with the cyclone and the damage there. It's affecting so many of members of the farming community. So the share price, it dropped 0.7% today as a result of that negative outlook. And, we're in the middle of the reporting season, and it's the outlook that shareholders are really paying attention to, which brings me to a story that just broke just before 5 o'clock tonight on Sky Television. They're planning to restructure their business in order to save what they hope would be millions of dollars over the next couple of years. They're going to be talking to their staff. They're planning to relocate 2/3 of their call center jobs to the Philippines, where they have a partner. That would be 200 jobs there, 100 still in New Zealand to handle more difficult technical types of calls, etc. In addition, another 90 staff will potentially lose their job because they're going to outsource technical services and so forth to another company that's based out of India. We don't have any more information about it because that company will be reporting on Thursday, and at that time we should find out a little bit more.
Okay, quick race through the numbers,
right,
please.
So the index ended down, that's the top 50 index, it ended down 0.8%. That was a 95-point drop to 11,801. The New Zealand dollar is also a little bit weaker at 62.4 US cents, 90.5 Australian, and 51.9 pence. And that's before we hear from the Reserve Bank tomorrow on the official cash rate, following the US Federal Reserve on Thursday morning.
Thank you, Nona. Ka kite, Nona Peltier with business there. In own goal for National today, with MP Maureen Pugh plunging her party into a controversy over climate change. She began the day telling reporters she was still waiting to see evidence of whether humans contributed to climate change, but that stance was gone by lunchtime after a chat with her boss. Here's our political editor, Jane Patterson.
The first full day back at Parliament for 2023, and MPs were facing questions about the cyclone and the impact of climate change on the recent extreme weather. Nationalist MP Maureen Pugh was asked whether she thought human activity was a contributing factor.
It's not what I think, it's what I can prove. I am waiting on the evidence from the Minister that provides that evidence.
That stance got short shrift from leader Christopher Luxon.
I disagree strongly. I've seen the evidence. I've seen it up front.
And from the Deputy, Nicola Willis.
I've got a lot she can read. She's going to be doing a lot of reading.
Other National MPs sticking to the party line.
I believe that there is an effect that happens, yes. The question is always around the degree of what we can do and what we can't.
Yes, obviously man has an impact on the climate, there's no doubt about it.
Over the course of my lifetime I've seen the flow, the shift and the change and the intensification.
A gift to the government when the only attention should have been on the urgent response to the cyclone.
Staggered, the National Party is still having this debate. Climate change is absolutely man-made.
Oh, well, I think Simon Bridges made some comments on that a couple of years ago. I won't repeat them here, but I put them in that category.
Climate Change Minister James Shaw says the science has been settled for decades.
There are tens of thousands of New Zealanders who have just had a first-hand lived experience of the effects of climate change, and we cannot debate the basic science for why they are going through that experience.
But Maureen Pugh's musings on climate change were gone by lunchtime.
Yes, I do have a statement to read that I've just put together.
It was a swift about turn, but she insists there was no pressure from above.
These are my words. I have not been instructed to say this at all.
Christopher Luxon says they had a conversation and Maureen Pugh backs the words in her statement.
In our caucus, as I've been clear from leadership from day one, our position is we are deeply, deeply committed to climate change. That is the position of the National Party, period, end of story.
Isn't this just a situation where an MP is actually expressing her true belief? It doesn't fit with the party position and is embarrassing for National. So she has changed her stance.
And that's by her coming out and actually saying, I didn't express myself well, which is what she's very clear. She's come out and said very strongly that the science, that she does support and believe in science and that man-made efforts have contributed to climate change, absolutely.
Maureen Pugh now has a hefty reading list courtesy of the Deputy Leader, and National a hefty task to present a believable, consistent message on climate change.
And it is 13 minutes to 6. You're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. Homai o whakaaro, we would love your feedback on anything you've heard on the programme this evening. Do get in touch. Don't forget, you can text us on 2101. You can tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ or the email address checkpoint@rnz.co.nz. Ko Evie anō tēnei. Here's Evie again with the headlines.
About 1,100 people in Hawke's Bay and Wairoa are still listed as missing after Cyclone Gabrielle. Eastern District Commander Superintendent Jeanette Park told Checkpoint more than 100 staff are working on tracing them. Police are asking people to update their details on their national website if they or a person they were concerned for is now safe. The cyclone death toll remains at 11. The government's spending $74 million over 5 years to target moderate truants, with about half the money paying for 82 attendance officers. Latest figures show 46% of children attended regularly in the third term of 2022, 13% were moderately absent and 13% were chronically absent. The figures are marginally better than term 2 last year, but still among the worst on record. The number of teenage girls giving birth has halved in the past 10 years. 11 in every 1,000 gave birth last year, compared to 25 in every 1,000 in 2012. Stats NZ says improved education and better access to birth control are the reasons. Fire and Emergency in Napier is evacuating people near the Aotearoa public golf course because of a spill of raw sewage. Fire crews, tankers and a hazmat command unit are at the site, and members of the public are asked to stay out of the cordoned area. The main concern is gastroenteritis. And finally, a 1.2-metre alligator has been captured from a lake in a Prospect Park, New York. It's not known how the emaciated reptile got there. It's been nicknamed Godzilla and is now recovering in the Bronx Zoo. Those are the headlines. To traffic now in the Taupo district. We haven't had an update on a crash there, but that was reported at 5 o'clock on State Highway 32 near Karangahape Road, south of Waihaha, and you will need to follow directions from emergency services that are at the site there. And as you heard in the news, the closure of State Highway 51 in the central North Island has now been extended between Farndon Road and Aotearoa Road because of that sewage spill. Our next news and weather is at 6.
Ngā mihi, Evie. Let's get to some of your feedback now. Some of you getting in touch about the situation with the roads. Estimated up to 400 kilometres have been damaged, or, well, totally knackered by the cyclone. Government putting $250 million into an emergency fund for repairs. But still, some communities are totally cut off. This person says, once upon a time, we used the sea to ship goods around New Zealand coasts. We used the Navy in support of this disaster. Is there no coastal shipping left that could carry containers to some of those older coastal communities with wharfs like Tolaga Bay? Good question. Hopefully we'll be able to give you an answer at some point. Another person says we shouldn't have put all that heavy freight on our roads and closed the rail lines. That is why our regional roads are suffering so much failure. Juggernauts have no place on vulnerable regional roads, says Jeff. Do keep your feedback coming. 2101 is the text. Tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ, or you can email checkpoint@rnz.co.nz. What roads do you think should be given priority, and what are the workarounds for communities cut off with some major routes causing massive detours? More than 90,000 children miss 2 or 3 weeks of class each term, and they could be getting a knock on the door very soon. This morning, the government announced a $74 million attendance package with a focus on moderate truants. Hours later, the Education Ministry reported just 46% of children attended school regularly in the third term of last year, and 13% were chronically absent. Here's our education correspondent, John Gerritsen.
The Term 3 figures are marginally better than Term 2 last year, but still among the worst on record. Principals and the government blame COVID, but admit the trend started before the pandemic, and today the government announced its third truancy initiative in 18 months. It boosts the attendance service to reach about 3,000 more of the most serious truants and establishes a new role, the attendance officer. Education Minister Jan Tinetti says the 82 officers will target those missing 20 to 30% of their classroom time.
We're talking in the tens of thousands of kids that we're getting to that don't slip into that chronic phase. That's what we want to stem the tide on, is those young people that have that risk of falling into chronic non-attendance.
The Minister announced the details at Wellington East Girls College, where Principal Gail Ashworth says moderately bad attendance has increased.
There are groups of parents who are now prioritising their young person's well-being and potentially whānau and family events and holidays now that the borders have opened up, and so that has an impact on that moderate attendance.
Other principals also welcomed the new funding. Barclay Middle School is in a group of schools providing attendance services in their part of Hamilton, and its principal, Nathan Leith, says it won't be easy to find the right people for the new jobs.
They need to be well known in the community and have links with all of our community for it to work well, because we know that the old system of waving the big stick and having an officer and get to school, it hasn't worked in the past, and it's not going to work unless we're working closely with our communities.
He says targeting moderate truants is a good idea.
We want to try and curve those attendance patterns some of these people are showing before it gets too severe. It's a case of probably making sure we fine-tune and identify the social needs that are stopping these children coming to school.
Vaughan Quillo from the Secondary Principals Association says 82 officers is not a lot, but attendance services are under the pump and any extra staffing is good. But he's not sure where the new staff will come from, and the job ahead of them is huge.
I and my colleagues would have capacity issues around the capacity of our current workforce to fill those roles. And then once those roles are in play, whether there is capacity to deal with the number of clients that might be referred to them, because we don't want an inundation to occur, because it will become dysfunctional pretty quick.
Meanwhile, Jan Tinetti wants better data about attendance. She says justified absences are often recorded as unjustified because schools don't have time to chase parents.
The destruction is still very visible in Wairoa, a week on from when the river swallowed half the town. About 250 homes were inundated and the town has only just reconnected to the outside world. With hundreds homeless, Hinemehi Marae has become the focal point for the town's response, and it's being run by some of those worst affected. Jamie Tahana and cameraman Samuel Rillstone paid a visit.
1 week on, Wairoa is still cleaning. The army marches streets with shovels. Bulldozers roll out of driveways. Yet another bucket of silt and muck. Street after street is piled with debris. Beds, toys, furniture, cars. Sections sapped of colour. Gardens, grass and concrete. All the same mud brown of dried silt and dust. Hundreds here have lost their homes, including Michelle McElroy. Her whānau forced out with just the clothes on their backs.
And none of us could ring 111. So we had to save ourselves, so as I was driving, I was stopping at houses, just had my hand on my horn and just on the car horn and just ran into some houses just screaming like, move, get out of your house because the river's coming.
It took mere minutes for the river to consume the suburb of North Clyde.
And it was silent and you would look at it and you go, oh, it's down there. Next minute it was up to your hip. And your car can't go, so it was about move, yeah.
Mary Jardine Lewis lost her home too.
When I left our property after rescuing my mother and my sister, mother being 85, the water was up to my waist. I shut the gate so none of our stuff could float out on the road.
And ever since they've been at Hinemehi Marae, Ms McElroy has what photos she could salvage drying on the concrete out front. But in the wharekai next door, she and dozens of others work from dawn till midnight in what's become the hub for Wairoa's response. Inside is brimming with donated kai, dozens of people wrapping sandwiches for those cleaning up. On the other side, they're sorting packs. Things like nappies, kai, bottled water. Out front, they sift through donated clothes. Out back, Steve Foley mans the barbecue.
Just whatever, taking the meat, stock taking meats, and meat's coming from everywhere. We're doing 600 meals 3 times a day. Yeah.
For the couple of hours we visit, the donations keep pouring in.
Just for Wairoa, bro. That's home. That's just gonna, in there, just gotta do it. Wairoa's going to get back to where it was. Yeah.
Mary Jardine Lewis, who lost her home, is running the kitchen.
We're pumping along, whānau. We're feeding the people, feeding the people, feeding the people.
It's all being coordinated by Michelle McElroy. Her home gone too. But she's determined to help Wairoa. It's what marae do best, she says.
You collapse at night and your bones are sore and you go, snap out of it, you're going to carry on. We'll collapse later.
But while the aroha is strong, concerns are mounting. People are exhausted. Many of the homes here are uninsured. How will they rebuild? Where? Ms McElroy says many had to run for their lives and lost anything. And that trauma hasn't quite been processed.
It's the post all of this chaos. It's the recovery. How do we deal with all that? The half of our whānau here uninsured, low socio-economic area, and now we're getting their houses condemned. How do we fix that?
They don't have the answers yet, but the whānau here at Hinemehi are determined. It might take a while, but Wairoa's bouncing back, they say. It's in a waiata composed by Mary Jardine Lewis and her mokopuna in the marae kitchen.
Hide it under the river silt. No, I'm gonna let it shine. I'm gonna let it shine, oh Lord. I'm gonna let it shine. Let it shine, let it shine all the time.
You need to check out the video and the moko there. We will put that up on our webpage, filmed by Samuel Rillstone and reporter there, Jamie Tahana. It is 6 minutes to 6. Kia mau tonu mai. Do stay with us. You're listening to Checkpoint on RNZ National. Now, many of us will have fond memories of Fantastic Mr. Fox, The Twits, Matilda and The Witches, but a stoush has broken out over the removal of words deemed inappropriate in some Roald Dahl stories. Now, I need to read this carefully beautifully. Interesting words in this next bit. Fat and ugly are just two that have disappeared, and the Oompa Loompas are now gender neutral. UK Prime Minister Rishi Sunak has even weighed in, saying he agrees with the BFG that we shouldn't gobble funk around with words. The ABC's Michael Edwards reports.
I've got a perfect puzzle for you.
The words of Roald Dahl brought to life. This is from the movie adaptation of Charlie and the Chocolate Factory, published in 1964. Dahl's fantasy-tinged writing has long been a favourite for young readers.
What are you at? Getting terribly fat. What do you think will come of that?
The original version of the book contains words authors might not use nowadays. Charlie's antagonist, Augustus Gloop, is no longer enormously fat, just enormous. It's now emerged Roald Dahl's publishers, the author died in 1990, are rewriting all of his works to take words like these out. In the new edition of Witches, a supernatural female posing as an ordinary woman now works as a top scientist or running a business, instead of as a cashier in a supermarket or typing letters for a businessman. The word black has been removed from the description of the terrible tractors in the book The Fabulous Mr. Fox. Not everyone is impressed, as the BBC's Sounds programme found out.
There are so many snowflakes in this world, and these snowflakes, if they know for a fact they're going to be offended by a single sentence or a single word in this book, what you do there is put the book down and you don't read it.
The one thing that really struck me was that sudden omission of working as a supermarket cashier to be replaced by a top scientist. What's wrong with working in a supermarket? So any parent who works in a supermarket who's reading that book to their children, suddenly they're removed, they're expunged.
Now what you do now, you're digging into the nuances of things to sanitise it for children who are just not being allowed to engage with the real world because of a certain, you're not going to like the word, but a certain woke strata who are controlling things to say, look, children don't need to hear this or see this.
The revelations have stirred debate. Is it a sensible move, broadening Roald Dahl's appeal, or is it, you guessed it, political correctness run wild? Salman Rushdie thinks so, but Philip Pullman, the famed author of His Dark Materials, had this to say to the BBC.
There are millions, probably, of his books in second-hand editions in school libraries, in classrooms, in Oxfam shops and the like. What are you going to do about them? All those words are still there. Are you going to round up all the books and cross them out with a big black pen? The point is, these words, these phrases and language uses do change over time.
His other suggestion? Let Roald Dahl go out of print and let other, younger authors take his place. Downing Street has entered the discussion. A spokesman for Rishi Sunak saying the Prime Minister has concerns about rewriting the books. He quoted Roald Dahl's BFG in a warning not to gobble funk with words. The Roald Dahl company has been bought by Netflix, which reportedly is planning to produce a new generation of movies based on his books.
I've got a perfect puzzle for you.
Yeah, gobble funking. That's an interesting expression. Hard to say too. Anyway, advice from Civil Defence for people in the Tairawhiti, Te Tairawhiti area. Stay away from the city's beaches, they're saying. Be careful on all coastal beaches. The woody debris is extremely dangerous. Don't swim or forage through the woody debris piles. That is Te Tairawhiti, and again, same district. Please reduce water use as much as possible. Only use it for drinking, short showers, essential washing and food prep. Power in the Tairawhiti area, only 397 homes remain without power. Power has been restored to the majority of Te Puia Springs, including the hospital. And we are told that internet and phone services are coming back up slowly across the region, but they're still unstable and connections may drop in and out. Curbside collection is back to normal, but there is a limit of 2 bags of stickered rubbish, and they are asking you please to hold on to your recycling. Flood damaged items can also be taken to Duke's on Stanley Road. They can take furniture and carpet, and green waste is to go to Judd's on McDonald's Road. And the State Highway 2, Gisborne to Aotearoa, is open until 7 p.m. Just a reminder, it closes at 7 p.m, not due to open until 7 a.m. tomorrow morning. And the State Highway Gisborne to Wairoa is open.
RNZ News at 6 o'clock. Good evening. Ngā mihi o te pō, ko Evie Ashton tēnei. Police say a dedicated team of more than 100 staff are working to locate missing people in Tairāwhiti and Hawke's Bay. Eastern District Commander Superintendent Jeanette Park says 1,131 people remain unaccounted for in the region. She says staff are engaging with the community to reassure people and provide support.
So the sooner we can locate everybody, the better. And, you have my absolute reassurance that we will not stop. We will never stop. We want to locate everybody where these reports have been put through.
Jeanette Park says the official death toll from Cyclone Gabrielle remains at 11. Napier health officials are investigating a raw sewage spill on Napier's Aotearoa Road. Fire and Emergency have set up cordons in the Aotearoa area near the golf course and are telling people to stay away. The area's Medical Officer of Health, Bridget Wilson, told Checkpoint it's an unfolding situation and health protection officers are still trying to work out what's going on. Anyone who might have been exposed could become sick and they should seek medical treatment immediately. As the first funerals for victims of Cyclone Gabrielle take place, the Funeral Directors Association is reassuring the public there's plenty of capacity to provide families with a meaningful farewell. Like the rest of Hawke's Bay and Gisborne, funeral homes have suffered flooding, power outages and communication difficulties. But Association President Rachel Benz says the Funeral Disaster Relief Team is there to support local funeral homes.
So if they are overwhelmed or need assistance, that we have trained and qualified funeral directors from all over New Zealand, and we've even had office from Australia and abroad for them to be able to come and assist in the area where needed.
The Funeral Disaster Response Team also operated during the Christchurch earthquake, the mosque shootings and the Whakaari White Island tragedy. Auckland Council has assessed just over 6,800 properties as a result of the January 27th floods and Cyclone Gabrielle. Of these, 559 have been red stickered, 2,197 yellow stickered and just over 4,000 white stickered, meaning they're safe to live in. The council says entry is prohibited to some properties which weren't damaged because they're at risk from unstable ground, mostly in Moruwai and Piha. It says 51 local roads are still inaccessible. Residents near an historic shot tower in Auckland's Mount Eden are facing a second week away from their homes after a decision to demolish the tower over safety concerns. The demolition began this afternoon on the heritage-listed tower, which was built in 1914 to produce lead pellets for shotguns. Luca Foreman has more.
Residents were evacuated last Monday before Cyclone Gabrielle and will now have to wait another week while the tower's demolished. One resident, Sylvia Duda, says she's able to stay with family, but others have had to figure out accommodation at their own expense. The owner of a nearby Vietnamese restaurant, Bo Nguyen, says they're unable to use their back entrance for deliveries as they usually do. Both he and Sylvia Duda are sceptical that the demolition will be finished in the proposed 7 days.
Ukraine's president says a world order based on rules and humanity depends on how events play out in Ukraine. He was speaking after US President Joe Biden's unannounced trip to Kyiv. Volodymyr Zelensky says Ukraine is certain to repel the Russian invasion.
Specific steps for this are known. Our defence needs for this are known. Our partners are also well aware of what actions are required for this. Actions, first of all, of our soldiers at the front. All it takes is resolve. Today I saw such resolve from President Biden and the United States of America.
Joe Biden says the US will back Ukraine for as long as it takes. Kāinga Order is seeking opinions on a proposal to replace 40 state houses on larger sites in New Plymouth with 100 new homes. Regional Director Graham Broderick says the plan's initial focus is on the suburbs of Westtown, Frankley Park, Brooklands, Vogeltown and Spotswood. He says part of the Housing Authority's redevelopment program would see older homes that are past their best replaced with a larger number of new builds that are warm, dry and healthy. There are 348 families on the housing register in New Plymouth. And Jacinda Ardern has formally tendered her resignation from Parliament to come into effect from April the 15th. The Mount Albert's MP stunned New Zealanders last month when she announced she'd stepped down as Prime Minister. Delaying her resignation until now avoids the need for a by-election in her electorate. That's the news.
I'm Mahingarangi Forbes, and I'll be discussing all the big issues this election year with Māori commentators, newsmakers and even the odd politician on RNZ's new podcast, Mata.
They will say that the next election will be based on the economy.
So join me for Mata with Mahingarangi Forbes after the 6:30 headlines this evening on RNZ National.
Kei te whakarongo mai koe ki te reo irirangi o Aotearoa. You're back with Lisa Owen next on Checkpoint. Right now, the short forecast from Met Service to midnight Wednesday. From Northland to Taranaki, including Bay of Plenty and the Central High Country, mainly fine, isolated showers. From Gisborne to Wairoa, fine today. A few showers from tomorrow afternoon, some possibly heavy, then turning to rain in Wairoa tomorrow evening. From Whanganui to Wellington, cloudy, isolated showers increasing tomorrow afternoon, then in Wellington and Kapiti turning to rain tomorrow evening. Nelson and Marlborough mainly fine, a few showers developing tomorrow morning, turning to rain tomorrow afternoon. Canterbury, Otago and Southland, rain spreading north later today and tomorrow morning with heavy falls possible, turning to showers tomorrow morning in Southland and Otago. Bulla and Westland, a few showers turning to rain in Westland this evening and in Bulla tomorrow morning, then clearing to fine tomorrow evening. For Fiordland, periods of rain with heavy falls, becoming fine tomorrow morning, and for Rekohu, Chatham Islands, fine today, showers tomorrow. The time is 6 minutes past 6. I will have news headlines for you at 6:30.
Kia ora rā e ho, no mai hoki mai, this is Checkpoint, ko Lisa Owen tēnei. An estimated 400 kilometres of road have been significantly damaged in Cyclone Gabrielle, posing massive problems for the freight industry. About 93% of the country's goods are transported by road, but right now a significant number of routes are blighted with slips, single lanes, restricted operating hours and detours. And some of those detours add hours and expense to essential routes. The government's already announced $250 million in extra funding for emergency repairs. Transporting New Zealand, Aotearoa boss Nick Leggett joins us now. Kia ora, Nick. What are your members telling you about the state of the roads right now?
Well, the trucking industry were not rapt about the state of the roads prior to the cyclone, but I can tell you it's a lot worse now. But at least I think there's common agreement about what needs to be done in terms of getting those vital freight routes open between our major provinces, and also really up-speccing the infrastructure, the design, the quality, where perhaps some routes are reconstructed, to maximise both people flow but also the movement of freight efficiently around the country to power the economy.
So, Nick, are you expecting more than just a patch-up or restoration? You're expected to build back better?
Yes, I think that's what the Prime Minister has indicated, and it's certainly something that the industry has been calling on for some time. We know that with these big roads of national significance, Waikato to Auckland, the expressway, the roads in Wellington, including Transmission Gully, they are more resilient to weather. They're safer, they're better designed, better engineered. Most of the time they've got better materials and are better constructed, and they save lives. From those perspectives, they also lower emissions, Lisa, because they're easier to drive.
They're also expensive, right, in terms of initial layout. So $250 million kicked into this emergency repairs fund. That's got to be a drop in the bucket, doesn't it?
I'd say so. I mean, given the fact that Waka Kotahi had an extra $400 million for roading maintenance, catching up on probably more than a decade of underinvestment, that they probably were going to struggle to spend anyway. We actually need people power to come forward as Labor to actually rebuild, to rebuild these routes and look at larger construction. I think we need to build a pipeline of work and people over the next decade or so, because it's not just something you can turn on and turn off. The country has to power up in terms of its infrastructure, and I think we've got in front of us a great opportunity to do that. And I'm quite I suppose I've got some inspiration from the Prime Minister's words around the fact that he said, yes, it is going to cost more money and we'll just have to find it.
So what are the priority roads in your mind? Because not everything can be done at the same time. So what's your go-to list? Let's say top 3 things they need to address immediately.
Well, I think some kind of sustainable link from the Hawke's Bay to Tairāwhiti. We've got big productive areas of the country. Northland, of course, is really, for a long time, has been really suffering because of poor roading infrastructure, but Auckland as well. And it's not. So
you're talking about State Highway 1 there through the Brynderwyns at the moment is out, isn't it? Yeah,
that's right, exactly. But there are things like the East-West Freight Link in Auckland. We've also got to look at our policy, congestion charging. It's looking at the whole suite of things that are available to a government, and Lisa, the other thing I'd really like to say as well, we've got to depoliticise this. I think what this extreme weather and the results of that weather show us is that we can't get into these silly road versus cycling debates any longer. We've got to build quality infrastructure that lowers our emissions, is safer and is less prone to be knocked out. We do things on a small scale in this country. We've done that for too long. We haven't had the right specifications. It's now time to actually really stand up collectively, I think, and say, we've got to find a new way forward.
Should Auckland and an East-West Freight Link be a high priority when you've got people in Te Puia Springs who are cut off and a state highway around the coast that's impassable?
Well, I'm talking more there about the medium to long term. We do, of course, in the short term, it's getting those communities that are cut off. It's whānau around the East Cape that are isolated, in the Hawke's Bay that are islands, I think, as you described them earlier. Of course, those are the priorities. And that, of course, is the productive heartland of the country as well. So getting those industries standing back up will then allow, the roading and the transport to function.
When you say short-term, Nick, I mean, what in your head is short-term? Because some of these roads will take years to fix.
Yeah, I think, to me, the short-term is the next year or two, because that's got to be the horizon that we're considering, because nothing is instantaneous. As I said, we don't have the expertise and the labour, I suspect, in the country to do all this work at once. So it is going to have to be prioritised. And that is...
Migrant workers?
Yes, if that's required, absolutely. The government have already
relaxed. Do you think it is required, Nick, from what you're saying?
Yes, I do. I do, but I think we've also got to focus on training New Zealanders, as the government has signalled. It's if we're thinking about migrant workers to become residents of New Zealand to fill a long-term labour shortage and to build an infrastructure pipeline, absolutely, but we've got to take a long-term view, Lisa, with the design and the build and the people required.
Appreciate your time, Nick. That's Nick Leggett from Transporting New Zealand. About 100 communities on the east coast of the North Island remain cut off, and it's not clear how many people are in those isolated areas. Meanwhile, volunteers and authorities are scrambling to get much-needed supplies into the right hands. Our reporter, Somya Bamidi-Pati, is in the Hawke's Bay.
A warm jacket or top, 2 tops, 2 pairs of pants, and then it's going into pallets over there. And one side of the building, people are putting it into boxes of types of clothing, and then it gets brought here, it gets bundled up, and then it gets sent out.
Tanya Reid is one of about 100 volunteers at the regional distribution hub in Hastings. A mum herself, today she's sorting donated children's clothing.
I guess you think of your own child when you're doing it and what would they like to wear, and thinking about the families who they're going to. all of us over this last week have just had a sense of, oh my God, what can we do to help out?
The hub's been set up at the Tomoana Showgrounds. A rotation of helicopters regularly fly in to be loaded with supplies, before being sent back out within about 20 minutes. The hub's manager, Kirsty Maynow, says the centre has been inundated with donations from across New Zealand and is now sorted for bedding and clothing. She says it's helpful for donors to check what's needed before donating.
People have a great intent of what, they've got, I need to give them this, but we do ask that it's clothing that is generic. We don't need nightclub gear. And just we do ask that whatever's donated is serviceable. The last thing that people on the ground need when we're giving them a box and they think they can use it and then they find it's broken.
The ex-Army logistics veteran says the scale of distribution here is unlike anything she's ever experienced.
What I love about this is the volunteer force and what they bring to it. In a military environment, you don't really have volunteers, it's military. But some of these people, their whānaus are affected. That they might have people missing. We don't know what's going on in their world, but they still, when they can, if they've got the time, they're here every day to help get stuff out the door.
The supplies are for those affected by the storm, particularly people in cut-off areas. Hawke's Bay Civil Defence Emergency Group Controller Ian McDonald says there are about 100 of these communities from Wairoa to central Hawke's Bay. He says it'll be weeks before some are accessible by road. And while the communities are thought to range from between 10 to hundreds of people, it's unclear just how many people are cut off. Iwi controller for the region, Henry Heke, says Māori networks are helping to reach some of the isolated areas.
We found out yesterday there was 3 Māori communities that I had no idea we hadn't made contact with, and we've realised that we need to get some services into there. So today I've been sourcing Starlinks, and they'll be arriving, and they'll get choppers up into those areas with generators and power, and then we'll take some food and some water up there too.
Food, water, clothing, bedding, toiletries, generators and fuel are all much needed. But one thing that won't be as easy to source is housing. Henry Heke says Ngāti Whātua in Auckland has offered up 200 cabins, but he says that's just not enough.
We've got over 1,000 people that are homeless before the cyclone. So now we don't know the full brunt of this, but we could be up to 1,500 families that are displaced on top of what we already had.
With winter on its way, Henry Heke says the matter becomes more urgent with each passing day.
Soumya Bhamidipati reporting there. It is 17 minutes after 6 and you're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. As the one-year anniversary of the Russian invasion of Ukraine approaches, the impact of the war continues to be immense and felt all over the world. Western nations have been united in condemning Moscow and supporting Kiev, but as the conflict enters its second year, that unity may be starting to fracture. The BBC's Katja Adler has more.
This is Estonia's waking nightmare. Forced to repel an attack by neighbouring Russia. But what I came here to watch was a military drill. And this Baltic region no longer feels so exposed. With the UK in a leading role here, NATO has boosted its presence massively since Russia invaded Ukraine.
Conventional warfare is back here in Europe on a scale we haven't seen since the Second World War. That sense of peace and relative security that we've got used to has been well and truly shattered. But what Moscow didn't expect is that would bring Europeans closer together.
But as the war grinds murderously on in Ukraine, will allies stay the course? Absolutely yes, is the answer we got from NATO's multinational troops.
We are one, and an attack on one is an attack on all.
So collectively, we can defend each other?
It's critical to be here, especially at this time of year, 12 months on.
And I'm really glad to be here to ensure the protection of Europe.
But 1,000 miles away in Berlin, that all for one and one for all attitude is fading a bit. We went to this bilingual church service to meet Ukrainian refugees praying for loved ones back home. Germans call the war their watershed moment. They revolutionized defense policy to help Ukraine, and opened their arms to around 1 million refugees. But
1 month, 2 months, 3 months, we stay.
Nina from Kharkiv told us German hospitality is under pressure, with no end to the conflict in sight.
I don't see where the war is finished.
War weariness is chipping away at public engagement in Germany, as in some other European countries. But Father Sven thinks people are most preoccupied by rising costs of living, linked to the war.
In the beginning, there was an enormous engagement of many people who wanted to help and to support, and currently we receive roughly 95% less than in the earlier months. They're getting more and more cautious to spend the money they might well need for themselves.
Wherever I go in Europe, people tell me Ukraine's suffering should stop. But how much they still want their country to help, at what cost, and how far Russia should be pushed back or punished, their views vary greatly. Here in Italy, around 50% of people don't want their country to send any more weapons to Ukraine. That's in stark contrast to public opinion in the UK, the Netherlands, and those really close to Russia who feel directly threatened, like Poland. Mistrust in NATO and the US, and openness to Russia's narrative, you often come across that in Italy.
Peace, that's what we need, and things to go back to normal. Russia or Ukraine, who's right, who's wrong, I'm no expert.
Let's head to the UK now, where a body found in a river in Lancashire has been confirmed as that of missing woman Nicola Bulley. The 45-year-old disappeared while walking her dog more than 3 weeks ago, sparking a major search operation. Ms Bulley's family has appealed for privacy amid intense media coverage. The BBC's Judith Moritz has more.
The Lancashire landscape held on to its secret for more than 3 weeks. The River Wyre, snaking its way through the fields here, had the answer all along. What happened to Nicola Bulley? Now we know.
Sadly, we are now able to confirm that yesterday we recovered Nicola Bulley from the River Wyre. Nicola's family have been informed and are of course devastated.
Nicola's family have asked that we release the following statement on their behalf as follows. Our family liaison officers have had to confirm our worst fears today. We will never be able to comprehend what Nikki had gone through in her last moments, and that will never leave us. Nikki, you are no longer a missing person. You have been found. We can let you rest now. We love you, always have and always will. We will take it from here.
As Nicola went missing whilst walking her dog next to the river, the Wyre was searched extensively, but she lay unseen for 24 days. Yesterday, her body was found by members of the public about a mile downstream. Lancashire police said all along they believed Nicola had fallen into the water, but the force has been criticised for its response, and especially for its decision to release personal details about the mother of two. When the cameras have left this village and the posters and ribbons have been taken down, the police and the media will have some soul-searching to do, including whether the relationship between them had any influence on the way the case itself was handled. Nicola's disappearance has had mass coverage. The media converged on her small village, and her family directly criticised some organisations.
We tried last night to take in what we had been told in the day, only to have Sky News and ITV making contact with us directly when we expressly asked for privacy. It is shameful they have acted in this way. Our girls will get the support they need from the people who love them the most. And it saddens us to think that one day we will have to explain to them that the press and members of the public accuse their dad of wrongdoing, misquoted and vilified friends and family.
As a retired Lancashire detective, Bob Eastwood has watched the case and its coverage with interest.
Can you separate out the way the communications were dealt with and the investigation?
I think there became a big beast that was hungry for information. People were going out for their own information. People were making things up. Experts were adding to it, and quite clearly, in my view, they were making it up based on no evidence whatsoever.
The yellow ribbons, still fluttering, were supposed to signify hope. Tonight, that has run out. Now Nicola Bulley's family know she's not coming back. The mystery of her disappearance ending with the saddest of answers.
A vast trove of Cambodian jewellery, some dating back to the 7th century, resurfaced in London last summer. The stolen items belong to a British antiquities smuggler, and experts say they're stunned by its existence. The collection has been secretly returned to Cambodia's capital and is due to go on display in the country's National Museum. The BBC's Celia Hatton reports.
From Angkor Wat, Cambodia's 12th century temple complex that's one of the world's top heritage sites, you can see jewellery carved into stone. Now, we know this jewellery exists in real life. These stolen Cambodian antiquities have been rediscovered in London. These are Angkor's crown jewels.
This might be a piece from a crown.
Archaeologist Sonetra Song studied Angkorian jewellery for years.
There are carvings on the stone.
Only by examining temple carvings. Finally, she holds the real thing.
I could not believe it, and especially it's like from one single collection.
Experts think this crown could date to the 7th century. This gold cup is believed to have been a royal rice bowl. And these? A puzzle for archaeologists how they were used.
Another mystery, exactly how these items traveled from Cambodia's precious temples halfway around the world to the UK.
Much of Cambodia's looting happened in modern times, during 3 decades of civil war that began in the 1970s. We know that this man profited from that turmoil. The antiquities smuggler, Douglas Latchford. A British citizen, Latchford died in 2020 as he was awaiting trial in the US. Latchford's family agreed to return his stolen collection, but the authorities didn't know what would be handed over.
I'm just so excited.
Brad Gordon, the head of Cambodia's investigations team, was the first to see the jewellery.
And I was driven by a representative of the Latchford family to an undisclosed location. There was a vehicle, the door was open, and inside were 4 boxes of Cambodia's greatest treasures. I felt like crying. I just thought, wow, the crown jewels of the Cambodian ancient civilization had ended up here in the UK. And it was all packed up in 4 boxes in the back of a car.
Last year, we went to Cambodia to meet looters turned government witnesses. They've identified items they say they stole from temples and sold to Latchford and his network. Items investigators have traced to UK institutions like the British Museum and the V&A. Cambodians want all their stolen items back, including the country's authoritarian leader, Hun Sen. An election's coming up in July, and the jewellery's return will be painted as a victory for him. Politics aside, Cambodians will celebrate this unexpected surprise. After decades in the dark, these treasures will soon go on display, ready to shine once again.
Okay, before we head off, some information from Hawke's Bay and its health advice from Te Whatu Ora, Hawke's Bay. As the silt dries, it says the surface layer can become dusty when disturbed by vehicles or clean-up activities. Now, this can affect your health, cause eye irritations, a cough, and also exacerbate asthma. So they're saying avoid it. Stay inside where dust levels are high. Avoid exercising in the dust. And you need to wear suitable respiratory protection, gloves and gumboots and sturdy shoes if you are involved in cleaning up. Also a message in relation to dead livestock. If you have too many to dispose of yourself or do not live on a farm, please call 0800 108 83, or you can also phone the Hawke's Bay Regional Council for assistance with that. In terms of the roading updates, State Highway 50, Takapau to Hastings is closed. State Highway 51, Clive to Aotearoa between the intersection of Farndon Road and Aotearoa Road is closed. So be aware of that. The Lake News team's going to keep you updated throughout the evening. And don't forget, if you missed anything on the program, you can always find Checkpoint on Spotify, Apple, or wherever you get your podcast from. Ko te kaupapa tuatahi a pōpō. Tomorrow from 5 a.m. on First Up, an 80-year-old Wairoa farmer shows First Up through his 150-year-old flood-damaged home, and he tells the program why Cyclone Gabrielle was so much more damaging than Bowler. Don't forget to tune in, 5 a.m, First Up. We'll catch.
Police say 1,131 people remain unaccounted for in Tairāwhiti and Hawke's Bay. Napier health officials are investigating a raw sewage spill on Napier's Aotearoa Road. Inter Islander says it can't reschedule bookings made on its Kaiadahi ferry after it was taken out of service for repairs, potentially stranding passengers. And Jacinda Ardern's resignation from Parliament will come into effect from April the 15th. Those are our headlines. Our new podcast, Mata, is up next with Mihi Ngārangi Forbes.
Anō haere atu anō aku mihi whakawhetai, aku whakamānua kia koutou katoa. Kua tahuri mai ki te pai o Mata. Ko mihi Ngārangi ahau e kawi ana I te Māori o tō tātou wānanga I te rānei. Welcome to the very first episode of Mata with me, Mihi Ngārangi Forbes, supported of course by the Public Interest Journalism Fund and Te Māngai Pāho. Well, today we'll be discussing the issues making headlines and headwinds. In Hikama, there have been a lot of them. Later in the show, I'll be joined by Tauhenari and Dr. Lara Greaves. Engari mātua rā, kia tahuri ake tātou ki te Tairāwhiti. It's been a week since Cyclone Gabrielle hit, and whānau across Aotearoa are still doing it tough. The Hawke's Bay and te Tairāwhiti have been ground zero, with thousands across the region displaced, with limited access to power, water and roading. Nō reira, kia hono atu tātou kia Kiritapu Allen, the MP for the East Coast, joins us now via Zoom from te Tairāwhiti. Tēnā koe, e te minata. Can you please give us your observations over the last few days?
Kia ora mihi. Yeah, look, we're looking at incredibly high levels of devastation throughout the rohe in terms of both infrastructure, homes, our businesses, lives have been significantly disrupted in the wake of Gabrielle here in Te Tairāwhiti and with our relations down the road down there in Ngāti Kahunu throughout the Hawke's Bay. She's going to be a multi-billion-dollar recovery that we're looking ahead of us, and I don't think we're under any illusion about that. Over the past couple of days, the real priorities have just been ensuring that our whānau get the basics, things like shelter, kai, access to power, water, and yesterday we had a pretty big breakthrough here in Te Tairāwhiti where we've got a lot more of our comms have been up and running so people can at least get news out to their whānau. And it also means here in Te Tairāwhiti today, businesses are starting to come online. But there's still some pretty big major issues we're dealing with. Our water supply is incredibly short. So we're on a conservation note. You shouldn't be using water unless you really need to here in region. And also our roading infrastructure has been pretty devastated. And that's both state highways as well as local infrastructure. So kaupapa at the moment, support our whānau as we transition through to the recovery phases.
In regards of hapori Māori, those little Māori settlements, are there any that are still of a major concern to you?
Well, there are some communities like down there in Waipiro, up there in Te Puia. They are physically isolated. So just last night into Te Puia, we had great news finally that they had a generator that was able to be dropped down to the hospital to be able to provide power. But they've been they are geographically isolated. Waipiro, I hear the spirits are high, but you know, making sure that we are getting things like kai and just the basic necessities of life. There's a really good system that